Hello, welcome back to our fifth recorded lecture. And with this recorded lecture, we are coming to the end of our first unit. And so what we have been trying to do in these past few sessions is to paint a picture of the world in which the New Testament emerged and the people of the New Testament lived. And I know that some of you have been anxious to get into the text itself, and we will certainly be turning our attention to that. But I think that you'll find that when we are in the text, that having spent the time that we've spent on this introductory material will provide a rich dividend that provides a deeper understanding of the material that we're studying. As we come to the end of this first unit, I thought it was important for us to do a little geography as we are looking at the New Testament world, or the world in which the New Testament emerged. And by and large, that took place in Israel. And so that takes us to the dealing with geography. And I know that some of you don't like geography. I promise you that this is going to be very, very easy. I think you might even find it somewhat interesting. So bear with me. You need a couple of objects, so you might want to pause and gather these things. If you go back to the Moodle page, you will find that there's a map for you to print out. And in printing out that map, it will look like this. So you can just print that out, and then you'll need to place it where the ABCs, as you see, is at the bottom of the page. The other thing that you might want to do is grab hold of your Bible. And if you're using the annotated Bible that we're using for this class, and again, these maps are different. In this Bible, it's called Map A1, but your Bible may have it different. But we're looking at a map of Israel, and you can see that this is similar to the hand-drawn map that I've asked you to print out. And so if you can kind of have these things laying side by side, I think you will find that the material that we're going to cover is much more understandable, and you might take away a few more things than you would normally. So this will be more interactive than what we've done before, where you may have been just taking notes. We're actually going to do some labeling of a map. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And again, just want to place Israel in the larger aspect of things. And as we think about it, we recognize that there's a larger place. And I'm going to use the arrow here on the computer, and I hope it is picking up here. And again, you may find a map similar to this. Here, we can always orient ourselves with Italy. We know where Italy is here, always looking like the boot. And then here is where Israel is located, right in here. But in the ancient world of the Assyrians and the Babylonians, their empires were here in this area. And so what we find is that the other great world power, before the rise of Greece, before the rise of Rome, the other great world power here was Egypt. And so if anyone wanted to get to Egypt, if you were in Assyria or Babylon, you would need to march overland, of course, and come into Egypt. Now, you can't go across this way, and you can't see in this particular map, but of course, what you can maybe make out there is the Arabian Desert. And so we know in math that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Well, that's not possible here because of the desert. So what we identify this is, and you may remember this from high school, this is the Fertile Crescent. And so let's see if I can move this up a little bit and get it out of your way. Here we go. This is the Fertile Crescent, and Israel basically served kind of as a land bridge. Now, I know that this is a map of Mississippi. I haven't gone totally crazy yet. But what I want you to see here is that Israel is a very small country. And I know that not everyone is from Mississippi, but those of you who are from Mississippi can begin to picture this. And again, I'll use the arrow from the computer. But of course, here we are right outside of Jackson in Clinton. And so if I moved from Jackson to Meridian, and some of you may be from Meridian, that's about 92 miles. Then I go north to Tupelo. See Tupelo here? Going north from Meridian to Tupelo is about 144 miles. And then zip over to Oxford, about 56 miles from Tupelo. And then if I came south back down to Jackson, that would take me about 147 miles. And so we certainly wouldn't want to do this, and we certainly couldn't do this because of COVID. But if we all got on a bus together this morning or tomorrow morning, and we all rode from Jackson to Meridian to Tupelo to Oxford and to Jackson, back to Jackson, what we would discover is that we have traveled the parameter about the size of Israel. And so the point I'm trying to make, as you see here on the PowerPoint, is that Israel would easily fit into Mississippi. So Israel is a very, very small country. And so as you look at the news and you see that people are having disagreements over land, why? Because there's not much of it. There's only so much land that can go around. And so that makes certainly a big, big difference. So let's go ahead and begin thinking a little bit about the maps themselves. And let's look at, again, the map that I have printed out for you, or the map that you are looking at in your Bible. And of course, if you've already had Old Testament, you know that this land was called many things. It was called Canaan, it was called Palestine, it was called Judah. And you'll remember that's where we get the name Jews, the people of Judah during the Babylonian exile. But the name that is modern for us today, and the name of the country during the time of Jesus and the New Testament, was Israel. And of course, the people lived there were Israelites. And we know from our overview of the Old Testament that this is Holy Land to three world religions, and that's primarily through Abraham. Of course, Abraham, the covenant people, the Jewish people, it is through Abraham's line that we have the Arab people through Ishmael. And then, of course, it is through Abraham's descendant through David is the birth of Jesus himself, on which the religion of Christianity is founded. And so consequently, we have a very important small piece of geography, but it is very important to three world religions. If you look carefully, you can see in the map that you have in color, regardless of whether you're using the map that's in the text or not, you can see there's going to be some different colors there, right? So here we have, again, I'm using the arrow on the computer. We have this very tan part, this brown part, and then this blue-gray part. So if you'll think of them as three strips of land going from south to north. South, of course, will be the bottom of your paper, and going north, sorry, let me get back to that. They're laying side by side, and they have very distinct geographical features. So here they are. And so I've labeled them on your map. This is A, the light tan, the brown is B, and the blue-gray is C. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And I've went ahead and labeled this first strip and what you need to know. And people always ask, is there going to be a map on the quiz and on the test? And the answer is no, but there will be map-like questions. You know, what is the name of the strip of land next to the Mediterranean Sea? What city is located in this particular strip? So my encouragement to you is to be able to visualize the map in your head. So when you're reading the text, you can kind of visualize where they are and where they're going from your orientation here from this session. So this is going to be very, very simple for us. We're going to simply label A as the coastal plain because it is next to the coast. And the water here is the Mediterranean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, okay? And so we have those two items. And then you see on the map here, number 1, if you'll label that as the city of Caesarea, 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 all right? So those are the 3 items here for this first strip of land. Here's some pictures of the coastal plain, and you can see the Mediterranean Sea here in the first picture. And the coastal plain was primarily for travel. So we talked a few moments ago about the land bridge concept, that if you were in the Babylonian or Assyrian empires and wanted to get to Egypt, you would have to go through Israel. You would march along the coastal plain. Later, of course, Greece and Rome will also have business with Egypt, and they would come through the coastal plain. Today, it's primarily known for farming, kind of the breadbasket of Israel. A lot of farming goes on here and produces much of the food. Now, we go back to Herod the Great, and you begin to see how all these things begin to pull together and relate to one another. Herod knew that Israel would not be a great city unless they had a seaport. And the seaport, of course, would be necessary for trade. And so one of the things that he does, and again, the earlier conversation we had about what made Herod great, was because of his building. And so he built a seaport. And I'll come back to those pictures in just a moment, but it's really quite fascinating, especially if some of you are thinking about doing something in engineering. You would find this very fascinating as well. But what they would do is build wooden molds, and they would use a sense of concrete similar that we use today, that was invented by the Romans. And so this concrete, when mixed together, would set in water. And so they would have this huge mold, they would float it out, they would fill the mold with the concrete, and then of course the weight would cause it to sink. And as that concrete sets, they would fix a little smaller mold, they would fill that with concrete, float it out, and it would sink. And consequently, what you would ultimately have is a wall that would begin to emerge from the sea floor. And this becomes then the seaport. And so what you see there is this top picture is an artist imagining of what this seaport would have looked like. And here on the bottom picture, you can see the remains, which is pretty much nothing but the amphitheater of Caesarea today. And what you can see and make out here from the shadows in the water underneath, you can see the remains of the outline of the seaport from some of the structure there, which makes it quite interesting. So you could see that ships would enter, they would be protected, and now you can unload and load for trade and whatnot. And again, by nature of the name of the city, you can again infer Herod's allegiance. Herod's allegiance was to Caesar, and named this after the emperor. Now, of course, anybody coming and going by water would come and go through Caesarea. Here's where all the news would come first. And so the Roman governor lived here in Caesarea and would make treks to Jerusalem as the need arose, primarily on feast days. And so this was the most Roman city in Israel, and it was filled with temples for the Roman gods, and it was considered to be the cosmopolitan hub of Israel as well, with all the trade and commerce and people coming and going. So when we get to the book of Acts and we discover that Paul is traveling to and fro, he is traveling by ship, and where does he come? He comes into Caesarea. And we'll also discover that he's held prisoner by the governor, and that will be done again here in Caesarea. So Caesarea serves as an important hub. if you will, it is the seat of Roman influence and power represented here in Israel. All right. If you have any questions or so, jot them down, and we'll certainly be able to cover them in class. That takes us then, I think, to our second strip. And so if you will kind of mark your maps accordingly. Here we have strip B. And again, if we went back and looked at your map in the Bible, you could see the shading. And the shading would show elevation. And so we're moving up because this is known as the Central Mountain Range. And so we're going up in altitude and elevation as we move again from the south to the north. So along the Central Range, we find 4 cities. And we're maybe generous in some by naming them a city. Some of them were more like villages, as I indicated to you. Nazareth, we thought, probably had a population of about 400. So I don't know if you want to call that a city, but here we go. Number 2 on your map is Bethlehem. And of course, we know this site as the birth of Jesus. And just a couple of miles away is Jerusalem. And so here is Jerusalem in the Central Mountain Range as number 3. And of course, Jerusalem is where all the pilgrims will come. This is the capital of Israel. This is where Jesus will be crucified. And in your readings in both the Old and New Testament, people would often say, we're going up to Jerusalem. So that's not a directional thing. That's just a thing as identifying that Jerusalem is where the temple is, and we go up to Jerusalem to encounter God. And so no matter whether you're from the east, the west, the north, or the south, you're always going up to Jerusalem. Then we go north about 70, 80 miles or so. And so it was always a 2-day trip between here in the north to the south in Jerusalem to Nazareth. And Nazareth is number 4. And of course, we know that Nazareth is the place where Jesus was raised as a young boy, and he stays there as a young adult. And then we have, just again, a couple of miles away is the city of Sepphoris, Sepphoris. And I'm going to hold that until a couple of lectures ahead, and we'll come back and talk about Sepphoris. So here we have the Central Mountain Range and 4 cities identified there. Well, again, my pictures aren't great here. This was taken toward night. But again, you can see the place where the temple might have stood, the Dome of the Rock here. And you can see we're in the southern part, so we're in some foothills before we get higher in elevation as we go north. And so you can kind of see the elevation here, some hills, that kind of thing upon which Jerusalem is built. And of course, here's a better picture of the Dome of the Rock. Now, down here in the lower left-hand corner, you see the most holy place in Jerusalem, and this is known as the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall. And here people gather. Here's the closest Jews can come to where the temple once stood. And so this is part of the wall that was not torn down when the Romans came in 70. And consequently, you can get up close to it and be amazed at the size of the stone blocks there, and the stone blocks there, and consequently, you're kind of amazed. If I could jump over that wall, I would be looking at the Dome of the Rock. So it's called the Western Wall. It's the closest people can come to where the temple was. All right. So that takes us to item C. Now, next to mountains, what would we have? We would have a valley. And so that's exactly what the strip C represents. It is the Jordan River Valley. All right. So let's go ahead and label our maps one more time, and then we'll be done with labeling. And so we label that strip as the Jordan River Valley, and let's work from the top down. Number 6 is Capernaum. It is located to the north of number 8, which is the Sea of Galilee. the Sea of Galilee. So, of course, the Sea of Galilee is not really a sea, it's a huge lake. I would equate it a little bit with the reservoir. I think if my memory is correct, the Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles long from north to south and about 4 miles wide from east to west. And of course, you have little towns all around the Sea of Galilee, little fishing towns. And so this is where Jesus conducts much of his public ministry, is around the Sea of Galilee. You can see it's not far from Nazareth, number 4. And number 6 in Capernaum is where Jesus pretty much settles down. This is kind of home base for Jesus in Capernaum. And then let's go ahead and go south to number 10, and you have the Dead Sea, okay? So you see the Dead Sea here, and then you have the Sea of Galilee, which is freshwater, and then connecting the Sea of Galilee from the southern point to the northern point of the Dead Sea, you have the Jordan River. And so that's number 9. So here in the Jordan River Valley, we have the 3 bodies of water that are very important in the New Testament, the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and the Dead Sea. And then the only other item to identify here is number 7 as Qumran, Qumran, which is not mentioned in the New Testament, but is very important to our understanding of things. Well, here you see a picture of the Sea of Galilee. And you can see that we're on the other side, we're in a valley. Here's the elevation of the mountain as part of the Central Mountain Range that butts up here against the Sea of Galilee. And so you can appreciate that even today, people are doing what they have done for thousands of years, and that is fish. At the headwaters, the flowing south of the Jordan River, so here's the Jordan River flowing out of the Sea of Galilee, going south, and then here you can see we're in a desert area, and the body of water in the distance there is the Dead Sea. Now, if you remember from strip B, we were going up in elevation. What we're doing now is we're going down in elevation. And so you see the note here that at the Sea of Galilee, we're at 695 feet below sea level. By the time we get to the Dead Sea, we're 1,300 feet below sea level. We're at the lowest place on Earth, okay? And so because of the heavy sea deposits around the Dead Sea, and because of the elevation, the water cannot support life. And again, if you've been to the ocean, you no doubt have had that experience of having salt water in your mouth. Well, guess what? The Dead Sea is at least 4 times, if not more, saltier than any ocean in the world. And so that concentration of salt prohibits from anything from living. Now, if you want to be technical, you know, they've been able to find some kind of microscopic life that lives in the Dead Sea, but no fish, nothing like marine life at all. The other interesting thing about the Dead Sea is that you can't sink because of your body's composition. You just kind of bob, you just kind of float. Now, unfortunately, if you've been to this area recently, you may not have even got to go into the Dead Sea because it is receding. There is a terrible drought and water problem in Israel, has been for some time now. And so the water where you typically go to get into the Dead Sea, that water is receding further and further back. So there may be a time where we come where there is no Dead Sea. But you note here on number 7, I asked you to mark that item as Qumran. And Qumran, of course, is the site of the archaeological site that we've looked at earlier of the Essenes, and hence where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And again, because of geography, because of the arid, dry air, if we're correct in our assumptions of what the Essenes had done in preserving the written documents in the caves there by Qumran, then of course the atmosphere, the conditions were right to preserve those kind of ancient manuscripts. So folks, that's pretty much it. That is geography. Okay, that wasn't too bad, was it? And so as we think about Jesus in Nazareth traveling to Jerusalem, Mary and Joseph in Bethlehem going to Jerusalem, or Jesus going from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee, we have that image in our head about how that worked and where all these places are. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. All right, so just to finish this up a little bit, let me say a few words about archaeology. Archaeology is not intended to prove the Bible, and neither is archaeology a treasure hunt. Now, when my kids were growing up, the big movie series at the time was Indiana Jones. And here Indiana Jones out there is discovering all this kind of neat stuff. But that's not what archaeology does. What archaeology does is it helps us put a proper perspective of how life was lived in the time being studied. And so the German word for this is Sitzenleben. And you see that here in the note on the slide. And Sitzenleben simply means in its place. And so basically, again, think about this with me for a few minutes. Let's assume that we're travelers and we're settlers, better word, we're settlers. And so we're going out west and we discover some land. And we want to make this land our home. Well, what would attract us? Well, certainly there'd have to be a water source, so we're next to a river, perhaps. There needs to be plenty of game, so we're next to some wooded area where there's wild animals that live that we can hunt and trap. We certainly maybe have a mountain close by that will protect us from the elements and from any invasion, okay? So these ingredients, and of course the land has to be fertile. We have to be able to raise crops. And so these ingredients together make this an important place. So we settle down, we build a cabin, and other people join us and they build their homes, and maybe even a town comes up, and then there's something terrible that happens, a plague, let's say, a pandemic, if you will, and it wipes us out. Well, in 100 years, here comes some more settlers. Well, guess what? The same conditions apply: the land, the water, the game, the mountain. So they settle. And what they basically do is they build their settlement on top of our settlement. And so over time and centuries, especially in an area that's rife with war, and towns are destroyed and new people come in and build, they're building on top of each other. All right? And so then what archaeology does is starts at the top and they dig down. And as they dig down, they find the artifacts and they are able to paint a picture of what life was like during that particular time. And so consequently, as you see here from the note, we find pottery and household and farming utensils, tools and weapons and jewelry and buildings and sculptures and all these kind of things. And they gives us clues as we paint a picture of what life was like. Just for fun, I threw this picture in here, if you can guess what this is, because again, it just challenges and changes our thinking about what life was like. This is a public restroom. And so the way it worked is, and it's a little gross, but again, you see right here this little trough. Well, this little trough would have been had running water in it, okay? And so you would have come in, you're out shopping in the city, you need to use a facility. And so you come in, they hand you a stick, and on the end of that stick is a sponge, and you can take a seat and do your business and then use the sponge to cleanse yourself, and you can swish it around there in the water in front of you. And then as you leave, you give the sponge back to the attendant for the next person. Now, again, I know that sounds a little gross and everything, but when you think about it, this is a high area of development. They would have a sewer system, they had sanitary systems, and they were able to maintain their waste. And so it changes the way we think about how life was like in the ancient world. And that's what archaeology does. It gives us insight into that period. Well, as we finish up, again, let me just share a few pictures with you to give you a sense of flavor of the of Israel today. If you go to Israel, you fly into the Tel Aviv airport, and now you are here in this land that is home to three world religions. Of course, this isn't the way you get around, but for picture purposes, again, you can see better that we're in a hill country. You can see we're up, and you can see under the camel's neck, there's the Dome of the Rock. So you can imagine as a pilgrim coming to Jerusalem that the temple is standing there, and the temple is glistening, and it captures your eye. And this is the place where God lives. Some archaeologists did put together a outdoor village of what Jerusalem might have looked like during that time. You can again see the slope. And of course, up here was where the temple would be. The temple complex would be at the highest point in the city. And again, here you see this. Here's the temple itself. And then this four towered institution here would be the Fortress Antonio. When the Romans come in, they build a garrison there next to the temple because, again, go back to our discussion there. Remember, one of their things is to keep the peace. And so they know that you have thousands of pilgrims coming to Jerusalem because of the diaspora. And so therefore, if there's going to be trouble, it probably would happen here. And so they want to be able to have a contingent of force to be able to keep the peace. And of course, when the governor comes from Caesarea, he will come and stay here at the fortress. And we believe it's at the fortress where Jesus will have his trial before Pilate. And I use the word trial with some quotation around it. Here's a better picture of the temple. And again, as we've talked about, you can see the larger portico back here, which would have been the court for the Gentiles. And then depending on who you were, is how close you could come to the temple. And the temple itself would be here, this larger structure here, and then you'd have the outer court and the inner court. Another picture. And then again, just a different viewpoint. You see here a hippodrome that again reminds us of the influence of Hellenism within the shadow of the temple itself. All right, so that gives you a sense, and you can see some people walking back here to give you a sense of the scale of this little city, but it gives you a kind of a bird's eye view, if you will, of maybe what Jerusalem would have looked like in Jesus's day. And here's a better close-up of the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall, and you can begin to appreciate the blocks that are making up this wall, which each weigh several tons. And so just thinking about the work and the involvement of actually building these walls. Israel, of course, today, as you know from our previous study, is a modern nation, a modern state. I would guess that only 10 to 15% of the people in Israel are religious Jews, but certainly the overwhelming majority of Israelites today are nationalistic Jews. They're very much for their country and believe in the Jewish cause, but not so much perhaps religiously faithful. If you are a citizen in Israel at 18, you are automatically enlisted into the military for 4 years. If you're a woman, you're in the military for 2 years. And so therefore you have mandatory service. When you're out, if you choose not to make it a career, when your time of service is up, you're automatically put on the reserves. You take your Uzi, you put it under your bed, and there it stays until you're needed. And again, tying this all back to what we said earlier, Israel's a very small country. And so as you can imagine, if Israel is invaded, you grab your Uzi from under your bed and you hit the streets fighting, because the fighting is right there outside your front door. So you don't have time to go down and report to the local commander or the local reserve unit. you're called to active duty immediately. And because you served in the military, you have some sense of training and know what to do. And I believe you're in the reserves until you're at least 50. So, so you have armed folks all around. I don't know the story here. Again, it's just a reminder that you're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy, if you understand that reference. And again, you know, we live as very privileged people, and I throw this in here just to show you that, you know, people shop each day for what they need, every few days for what they need. They don't have the huge kitchens and the huge Frigidaires to store food, but shopping is a regular, ongoing occasion, and that's why terrorists have been able to been successful in having such a high body count and bombing marketplaces, because marketplaces are things that are frequented by people on a regular basis. This is what they live by. Of course, here is an example of buying, someone stopping at the fruit stand and getting fruit and vegetables and those kind of things. Of course, I'm not sure this has been a contribution, but the Western world's contribution here is, of course, McDonald's. It's surprising how many people who go on foreign trips, they want to stop at the American-related restaurants. And I mean, here you are in a foreign country, and so you can take the taste the local fare of what's being offered, but there's always these demands. Here's a soldier ordering a Big Mac, I guess. You don't see someone with an Uzi every day ordering a hamburger. This picture for me just kind of summarized the ancient versus the modern. Here you have two Mercedes-Benz parked, and here's a boy pulling his donkey. And so there you go. That's the life you have in the ancient world and the modern world. This is in Nazareth, kind of very homey. This is a barber shop, and the barber's seeing that I'm taking a picture, and he's kind of waving there. And you got a couple of guys there in front playing backgammon. So that's very Andy Griffish like. Again, if you understand that reference, I'm old, so all my references tend to be old, but maybe you watch MeTV and you know who Andy Griffith is. Pottery, of course, some of the same kind of ways of doing things are continued to be done today. And ladies, if you go to Israel with your boyfriend or husband, be sure they take their wallet, because interestingly, tourism has been the #1 industry in Israel, and diamonds is the second. And so here's a diamond worker polishing a diamond. And then, of course, you run across folks who are in the traditional garb, and then you have people who are dressed very modernly. This is a picture along the streets of Jerusalem. And what I find captivating are the kids. And so I usually try to take pictures of kids and asking permission before I do so. Here was a school we visited, and you can tell that they're just very much like what we would have here in the West, even having a basketball court, even though the boy, I think, is holding maybe a soccer ball. Here's some little children doing some shopping all dressed up. And again, these two pictures, this one and the next one, were taken in Jordan. So these are little Arab boys and girls. And I asked this little boy if I could take a picture of him and his goat, and he looked at me and said, $1. And students sometimes then ask, did you pay him? And I said, well, do I have the picture? So of course I paid him. So he had found his way to make $1 or $2. And then you can usually tell those who are very observant Jews because they're wearing the traditional garb. If you're from New York or Chicago and have a dense Jewish group that lives in that city, you no doubt have seen people dressed in the traditional black and the dreadlocks there as part of the hairstyle. Don't know the story here, but apparently, you know, little boys give daddies hard times wherever we are. And to close this out, here we are on the Sea of Galilee at sunset. And again, Israel is a very beautiful country, and I hope if you haven't been, that one day you might be able to go. All right, this again concludes this first section. So again, let me ask that you review your notes. And again, if you have any insight or suggestions about how this process is going, if there's something I can do to make things easier for you, more understandable, I appreciate you putting the time in. You're coming to class one day a week, and these videos are taking up the equivalent of what would be another 2 days a week in class in a typical 50-minute class. And so you're getting the notes, maybe better so than if you were in regular class, because you can hit pause, you can rewind, you can play it back, you can watch it again. I just hope I don't plague your dreams with having watched being glued to the video screen. But anyway, there we go. So I'll look forward to seeing you in class again. We'll have a quiz. And again, I dare say if we haven't had some questions on some things we've hit a couple of times, you might see some questions from some of the previous videos in this, I think, third quiz that's coming up. But we'll work through it together. All right. Have a good rest of the day. Take care. See you next time. Bye.